Let's start with the disturbing and slowly work our way towards the most horrifying rituals on the list. Picture this: you're scrolling through your phone at 2 in the morning, probably avoiding doing something productive, when you stumble across some random historical fact that makes you think, wait, people actually did that? Well, congratulations, because today we're diving deep into the rabbit hole of ancient human behavior that would make even the most seasoned horror movie director say, yeah, that's a bit much. Here's the thing about ancient civilizations. We like to think of them as wise, spiritual, and maybe just a little bit quirky with their customs. But the reality is, some of these rituals were so unhinged that they make modern society look like a peaceful meditation retreat. I'm talking about practices so disturbing that historians sometimes debate whether they should even be discussed in polite company. Now, before we get started, I want you to understand something. These aren't just weird little ceremonies or strange traditions your great-grandmother might have had. These are full-blown ritualistic practices that entire civilizations built their identities around. And the craziest part? Most people have never even heard of them because they're so disturbing that they've been buried in the dusty corners of academic research. So buckle up, because we're about to explore 5 ancient rituals that will make you grateful you weren't born a few thousand years ago. And trust me, by the end of this video, you'll have a whole new appreciation for modern life. Number 5. The sky burial of the Zoroastrians. Now, when most people think about ancient burial practices, they imagine peaceful ceremonies with flowers and maybe some nice music. But the Zoroastrians had a completely different approach to dealing with the dead, and it involves leaving corpses on top of massive stone towers for vultures to devour. These structures, called Towers of Silence, were basically ancient all-you-can-eat buffets for scavenging birds. The Zoroastrians believed that burying bodies in the earth would contaminate the sacred elements of earth, fire, and water. So instead, they decided the best solution was to let nature's cleanup crew handle the situation. Here's where it gets really disturbing. Family members would carry the deceased up these towers, strip them naked, and arrange them in concentric circles based on age and gender. Then they'd just leave. The vultures would show up, and within hours, all that remained were bones bleaching in the sun. The surviving family members would return later to collect whatever was left and toss it into a central pit. But wait, it gets worse. During certain seasons when vultures were scarce, bodies would just sit there for weeks, slowly decomposing in full view of anyone brave enough to look up. Imagine living in a city where you could smell rotting corpses every time the wind changed direction. And yet, this practice continued for over 1,000 years because it was considered the most spiritually pure way to handle death. Number 4, the Aztec flaying ritual of Xipe-Totec. If you thought the vulture buffet was bad, wait until you hear about what the Aztecs did during their spring festivals. Every year, they would honor their god of agriculture and rebirth, Xipe-Totec, whose name literally translates to "Our Lord the Flayed One." And yes, the ritual involved exactly what you think it involved. The ceremony would begin with the selection of prisoners of war or volunteers who believed they would achieve divine status through their sacrifice. These individuals would be taken to the top of temple pyramids, where priests would perform the ultimate makeover. They would carefully remove the skin from the victim's body in one complete piece, like peeling an orange. But here's the truly disturbing part. The ritual didn't end with the death of the victim. Oh no, that was just the beginning. The freshly removed skin would then be worn by priests and nobles for the next 20 days as they danced through the streets. They believed that wearing the skin of the sacrificed would bring fertility to their crops and ensure a successful harvest. Picture this: you're walking through an Aztec city during festival season, and you see people dancing around wearing what essentially amounts to human leather suits. The smell alone would have been unbearable, as the skin would begin to rot after just a few days. Yet this was considered one of their most important religious ceremonies, attended by thousands of people who saw nothing wrong with this grotesque display. The priests who wore these skin suits were called Xipe impersonators, and they were treated like celebrities during the festival period. People would bring them food, gifts, and offerings, all while they walked around in decomposing human flesh. The psychological impact on both the participants and the observers must have been absolutely devastating. Number 3, the Druids' Wicker Man executions. Thanks to movies and pop culture, most people think they know about the infamous Wicker Man ritual. But the reality was far more horrifying than any Hollywood depiction could capture. The ancient Celtic Druids didn't just burn one person in a giant straw figure. They would pack these massive structures with dozens of victims and set them ablaze during their most sacred ceremonies. According to Roman historian Julius Caesar, who witnessed these rituals firsthand, the Druids believed that the gods demanded human sacrifice to ensure good fortune for their tribes. But they couldn't just sacrifice anyone. The victims had to be criminals, prisoners of war, or volunteers who believed their sacrifice would guarantee their passage to the afterlife. The construction of these wicker giants was an event in itself. Entire communities would spend weeks weaving massive humanoid figures from branches, hay, and rope. These structures could stand over 30 feet tall and were hollow inside to accommodate multiple victims. The anticipation and preparation would build tension throughout the entire tribe for months leading up to the ceremony. On the day of the ritual, the chosen victims would be placed inside the wicker structure along with animals, grain, and valuable objects. The Druids believed that offering a variety of sacrifices would please different gods simultaneously. Then, as the entire community watched, they would set the base of the figure on fire. The screams of the victims trapped inside could be heard for miles, echoing across the countryside as the flames slowly climbed higher. The ritual could last for hours, with the Wicker Man burning like a massive torch against the night sky. The Druids interpreted the sounds, the direction of the smoke, and the way the flames moved as messages from their gods about the future of their people. What made this ritual particularly disturbing was how normalized it became within Celtic society. Children would grow up watching these ceremonies, seeing them as natural parts of their religious calendar. The psychological conditioning required to make an entire population comfortable with mass human sacrifice is almost impossible to comprehend from our modern perspective. But we're just getting started because these next two rituals make everything we've discussed so far look like a pleasant Sunday picnic. Number 2, the sati immolation of ancient India. Now, if you think being burned alive is the worst way to go, imagine choosing to burn yourself to death because society tells you that's the honorable thing to do. The ancient practice of sati involved widows throwing themselves onto their deceased husband's funeral pyre, and it was considered the ultimate act of devotion and purity. But here's what makes this ritual absolutely terrifying. It wasn't always voluntary. Sure, some women genuinely believed that burning themselves alive would reunite them with their husbands in the afterlife. But many others were essentially forced into it by social pressure, family members, and entire communities that would rather watch a woman burn than support a widow. The ceremony would begin with the preparation of the funeral pyre, which could take days to construct properly. The deceased husband would be placed on top, surrounded by expensive oils, spices, and valuable possessions. Meanwhile, the widow would be dressed in her finest wedding clothes and jewelry, essentially being prepared like a sacrifice rather than a mourner. As the moment approached, the entire village would gather to watch. The widow would walk around the pyre 7 times while priests chanted prayers and the crowd cheered her on. Can you imagine the psychological pressure? Hundreds of people watching, expecting you to climb onto a burning pile of wood and just accept your fate. Once she climbed onto the pyre and it was lit, there was no going back. Guards would sometimes be stationed around the fire to prevent any last-minute changes of heart. The flames would consume everything within minutes, but those minutes would feel like an eternity of unimaginable agony. The crowd would celebrate this as a holy act while a human being screamed in pain just feet away from them. What's even more disturbing is how this practice became so ingrained in the culture that families would pressure young wives to commit sati even when their husbands died of old age or disease. Some women were drugged beforehand to make them more compliant, while others were physically forced onto the pyres by their own relatives. The psychological manipulation required to convince someone that burning themselves alive was not only acceptable, but honorable shows just how powerful social conditioning can be. These women were essentially brainwashed from childhood to believe that their lives had no value beyond their relationship to their husbands. And finally, number 1, the Carthaginian Moloch child sacrifices. If you want to understand the absolute depths of human cruelty disguised as religious devotion, look no further than ancient Carthage and their worship of the god Moloch. This wasn't just about sacrificing enemies or criminals. This was about parents voluntarily offering their own children to be burned alive in massive bronze furnaces. The ritual took place in special cemeteries called taufets, where archaeologists have discovered thousands of urns containing the charred remains of infants and young children. But what makes this practice so horrifying isn't just the scale of it, it's the methodical, systematic way these sacrifices were carried out. The Carthaginians built enormous bronze statues of Moloch with hollow interiors that could be heated like ovens. The statue's arms would be positioned so that when a child was placed on them, they would roll down into the furnace below. Parents would dress their children in their finest clothes and jewelry, essentially gift wrapping them for death. During times of crisis, war, or natural disaster, hundreds of families would line up to sacrifice their children. They believed that offering their most precious possessions to Moloch would convince the god to intervene on their behalf. The sound of children screaming inside these bronze furnaces would echo throughout the city while their parents watched and prayed. But here's the most disturbing part. To show their devotion and prove they weren't grieving, parents were forbidden from crying or showing any emotion during the ceremony. If a mother broke down in tears or a father tried to save his child, it was believed the sacrifice would be invalid and the gods would be offended. Archaeological evidence suggests that some families sacrificed multiple children over the course of several years. They would have entire sections of the Tophet dedicated to their family's offerings, like some twisted version of a family cemetery. The psychological trauma required to repeatedly watch your own children burn alive while maintaining a facade of religious devotion is beyond comprehension. The priests who oversaw these ceremonies became incredibly wealthy and powerful, essentially running a death cult that convinced entire populations that murdering their own offspring was not only acceptable, but necessary for survival. The manipulation and control required to maintain such a system shows just how far human societies can fall, when fear and superstition replace reason and compassion. These rituals continued for centuries, with some estimates suggesting that over 20,000 children were sacrificed to Moloch in Carthage alone. Entire generations grew up believing that burning babies alive was just another part of their religious calendar, no different from harvest festivals or wedding ceremonies. So there you have it, 5 ancient rituals that make modern horror movies look like children's bedtime stories. These weren't isolated incidents or the actions of a few disturbed individuals. These were systematic, culturally accepted practices that entire civilizations built their identities around. So there you have it, 5 ancient rituals that make modern horror movies look like children's bedtime stories. From vultures feasting on corpses to parents watching their children burn alive, we've journeyed through some of the darkest chapters of human history. And here's the thing that should really mess with your head. These weren't isolated incidents carried out by a few psychotic individuals. These were normal, everyday practices that entire societies not only accepted, but celebrated. The next time someone complains about how crazy the modern world is, just remind them that we live in an era where burning your neighbor alive for having a bad harvest season isn't considered a reasonable solution to your problems. Sure, we've got our issues, but at least we're not lining up to throw our kids into bronze furnaces or wearing human skin like a fashion statement. What's truly terrifying isn't just that these rituals existed, but how easily entire populations were convinced that the most horrific acts imaginable were not only normal, but necessary. It makes you wonder what practices from our own time future civilizations will look back on with the same horror and disbelief. But hey, if this video taught you anything, it should be that you're incredibly lucky to be alive right now, scrolling through YouTube instead of dodging vultures at a sky burial. So go ahead and hit that subscribe button, because compared to ancient ritualistic human sacrifice, clicking a little red button is probably the least disturbing thing you'll do all day.